Okay, this is the last session today. It's like a free jazz type of a conversation on topics like startup cities, network states, and stuff like that. So it's esoteric and exciting. And it'll be me on the stage facilitating the conversation with two great gentlemen here. So if you can join me. Actually, should I go with like your real name or your crypto name?
I'm totally doxed, so it's like the same, basically. Yeah, I'm Alex, executive director and founder of Blockful. What we do is basically optimizing human coordination through DAO tooling, governance, public goods. I'll chat more about that later. And also give a view about Zuzalu, what is Zuzalu, how it impacted my path, and also the path, I think, from the whole community in a sense. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And this is another Alex. Maybe if you can introduce yourself briefly.
Sure. My name is also Aleksandar, or Alex. I'm from Belgrade, Serbia. I guess the reason that I was originally invited to this panel is we were supposed to talk about clinical trials with psychedelics specifically, but we decided to kind of freestyle this session and talk about a couple of other things, clinical trials and so on. So just to give you a little bit of my background, I was in libertarian activism, I guess still am, for the last 15 years. I was working for the largest student organization oriented towards free market and individual liberty, where I ran their European programs. And after that, I moved on to policy. So I'm also, I would say, a political scientist. Filip and me studied at the same university. So my interests are also when it comes to network states, because we did mention those. I organized several conferences on back what we called microstates, and later on it emerged as network states, kind of being this term that sometimes is used interchangeably, most often not. But I think that's also part of what we're going to be discussing here. So that's very brief. I'm not gonna go too long into that.
Yeah, thank you. Before we start, like, how many of you in the audience actually know about Zuzalo and network states? How many have actually visited? Okay, cool. So maybe we can start. Like, personal is always the most interesting and exciting. So you're impressed with Zuzalo and you're actively working in that area. So the question is like, how did you get there? What are your impressions and some thoughts on the concept and why you think it's important? And especially from the perspective of, let's say, science, where actually certain people can just meet and build stuff from scratch, and basically your experiences and thoughts on the whole movement.
Sure. So I was at ETH Milan, where I met KJ, and KJ, she's like an active member in the Zuzalu community. She does basically the tech part, or coordinate the tech part at Zuzalu, so like Zuzalu City and the website itself and the tech infrastructure. So I met her at ETH Milan, and then I was going to DevCon DevConnect after that, and then she mentioned like, oh, we're gonna do a ZooConnect before DevConnect, and you should be there. So I had already heard about Zuzalu, so I got super interested, and so like that kind of like mysterious of what is Zuzalu, that mystery also makes part of it. So you get in the event, and even in the opening ceremony, it's like, so what is Zuzalu? And the point is not having a definition. It's more about gathering people, and gathering people that are working in the frontier of science in different areas. So you have like ZK stuff, you have longevity, you have DeSci, you have X-risk, so different researchers and people that are in the edge of their own technology or science. And this was what makes it special, because like this cross-pollination of different people that are like super passionate and knowledge about their science happens. And it happens in a really open way. Like there's no strict definition. Oh, that's a conference. It's more like a gathering, a community gathering. And there's even a term for it that is unconference. So it's like not a conference. It's
something like this.
yes,
this
yes.
Jazz.
Yes, what make it the event are the persons, is the community. So Zuzalu has this lack of definition by purpose, and it allowed me to change and get new ideas, and this also changed like the perspective of how I was seeing the space, and actually it impacted the whole vision of Blockful itself too. Yeah, so it was really important, and now next year we'll be doing a Zuzalu spin-off in Brazil, in south of Brazil. So also pretty excited for that, and yeah.
Would it also be like a pop-up type of style, temporary, or like?
Yeah. Something around like 1 month or 2 weeks, gathering the community in a space, and like no definition of. It's not like a strict agenda. Just maybe like, hey, this is the governance day, and then people come and do their own thing.
I can maybe add some.
Yeah, sure. But like, if you can transition from like this pop-up style to like more stable, let's say a microstate, like there are examples, or like you've been to Prospero, right?
I haven't.
Okay,
yet.
but I don't know how many of you are familiar with Prospero. Yeah, I mean, okay. So maybe if you can like educate the audience on it.
Sure. So just before
it's a very interesting experiment in governance, and it's very like we were listening to Lawrence from Vitalia, and it's very directly related to progress of science, because that's like a follow-up question for you as a political scientist, as in like how regulations can actually slow us down, and like full libertarian perspective would be like, okay, we're cyberpunks, like don't regulate us, but like. So basically, the first question is like, can you share a bit and educate on Prospero?
Sure. I can add several things on that. So just to kind of give you a brief idea, we, at least myself, started kind of going into the libertarian movement somewhere around 2008, 2009, and at that point there were a couple of ideas related to then called microstates. There were a couple of attempts, mostly failed attempts. And in the next couple of years, we would see a kind of this whole new emergence of many new initiatives. So one of them is actually located, and it has nothing to do, obviously, with Prospera and what we're going to be talking about. But one of them that's close to here, I don't know if maybe some people here have heard about it, is Liberland. And Liberland sort of came on the border, so it's like a small space between Serbia and Croatia, which was unused after the war when the lines were redrawn. There was actually a part of the land that was not in scope of Serbia or Croatia, and this founder of Liberland caught it on a Google map and said, hey, what if we came and built something sustainable here? That was obviously one of the proto tries, I guess, that people have been doing. In the scope of my work in the next coming years, we've been organizing microstate conferences and trying to kind of get the folks in this movement who came really from different sorts of backgrounds. So there were like hardcore libertarian anarchists who really wanted to see it moving that way. There were like business people who were in this space, and they thought there were opportunities for something like that. But then one of the real and probably the biggest, most successful attempts so far was Prospera. So Prospera, I don't know if someone said here that they've been to Prospera before. I've only met the founders, and I know a couple of people who have spent significant time there. I unfortunately haven't been yet. But basically, they came into an agreement with the government of Honduras to get ZEDE, so they call it the Zones of Economic Development, kind of looking at the amazing accomplishments that, for instance, Hong Kong or free economic cities in China had, such as Shanghai, but basically add a lot of capital and sort of ideas on how that could work. And how it moved forward is that obviously there were backs and forths with the Honduran government on how this is actually going to look in practice. So obviously there were concerns coming from many sides of that. But what they actually accomplished in the last, I would say, 10 years now is pretty amazing. So in the last 10 years, they've managed to get this whole piece. Well, there's actually a couple of islands. There's Morasan, there's Prospera, which is probably the biggest project. And I don't know if we're going to be getting it here, but that would be pretty cool.
Can you do that?
And
Can you do Prospera.com?
what? There's a Prospera website.
Okay, but this is cooler.
Oh, this is definitely cooler. So one of the cool things about Prospera, and this is where Vitalia happened the last time. The cool thing about it is that it is very easy for people coming there, businesses, individuals, to start off. So and this is when it comes in. It's pretty much the same for clinical trials. We can talk a little bit more in depth later. But what Prospera allows you is that you can function by the law of Honduras. You can function by the law when it comes to clinical trials specifically. You can choose any of the laws of the 30 OECD members, or you can create your own law, and then a panel of experts there is going to decide that this is something that's going to be applicable. So this creates sort of a very exciting environment where it allows new businesses, individuals to come with different ideas that would be maybe difficult to actually do due to numerous reasons, be it high costs, be it regulation, be it this or that, to come and suggest the regulation that they would like to adhere by, and to work on this pretty amazing piece of land. So back in 2023, there were again discussions in the Honduran parliament if this is sustainable, if this is going to last. But at the moment, it's still probably the biggest and the most successful project that we have seen built this way.
Do you by any chance know like any numbers? For example, like I don't know, total amount invested, number of companies, some metrics, impact metrics.
I would have to look at the numbers.
Not
There's
numbers.
definitely hundreds of companies that have been moved there. There was a couple of very successful projects started there, and obviously there's a lot of talks about new businesses coming in. We have had a clinical trial that's actually going to be ran, and the company is incorporated there, even though they're going to be doing some of the things offshore, obviously stateside, since it's a U.S. effort. But what we have been seeing so far is that there's a lot of interest, there's a lot of capital coming in, and there's obviously a lot of people who are at this stage pretty much just looking at what's going to happen and kind of deciding on their next move. But I think that with kind of Lindy effect and the fact that the longer Morasan and Prospera and all these places are there, there's going to be more certainty in investments, both coming from businesses and individuals, and we're going to be seeing that more and more, and obviously being scaled up.
Yeah, back to Zuzalu, like we were talking about like these villages popping up in like Georgia, or like you're doing the thing in Brazil. Like maybe you can share some other developments that are happening there that like inspire you, that people are probably not familiar with. And you also we were also chatting about like how it affected your worldview. So if you can share some experiences of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, perfect. So from Montenegro, I think Montenegro was the start, right? Then there was like a hackathon also, like in Singapore, related to Zuzalu. The third event was ZooConnect, that was before DevConnect. And I think ZooConnect, they started mentioning about enabling and incentivizing some spin-offs. Then back in January, that there was a Gitcoin round where Vitalik, I think, put like 250 ETH that will be distributed across initiatives. 1/3 of it was for tech initiatives around Zuzalu, and 2/3 for events. And from that, a lot of new events, including Zoofloripa, started like organizing themselves. One of those is Edge City. So Edge City had this co-living space in East Denver. they are doing one right now in San Francisco, so I will be going to that after Belgrade here. Switzerland, it's happening. Zoo Georgia. There is something around DevCon, I think, too. So yeah, there are plenty of options to get involved across like different continents, and yeah, it will be more and more common to see that, and also really cool to tap into different communities, and you really can travel from one to other, and I mean, it's super interesting. And how it affected myself, I had this opportunity to like be cross-pollinized, basically, you know, like be exposed to some ideas I never heard of from great people, and also sharing some of my experience.
It acts as like some sort of a very interesting like filter mechanism. Like you need to be in a certain way to actually join, and then it feels very organic. I would assume. Yeah.
Yes, that's one of the main points, that it doesn't feel like a conference, and it's not supposed to be a conference, right? If you go to a lot of those conferences, you are already kind of tired of it. You want to connect more to people, to ideas, and I think that's the end point. You know, that's the end goal. And in Zuzalu, you can feel that on practice. They do like this curation, and it's supposed to be people interacting with people, and not just, I don't know, business development, like conferences, you know.
Authentic, more authentic.
Yes. So how it most affected me was those new ideas that when I came back home, I just chatted with the team and was like, "Hey guys, we need to start looking into governance, because we were always working with DAOs, but it was not like, let's build around governance, let's improve that." And with the ideas, and we had talks about like public goods fundings, about governance, with like Vitalik, Kevin Owocki, Scott Moore, like all these guys that built a lot of amazing stuff and have a lot of knowledge. So yeah, it got me inspired to change what we are doing.
Our friend actually also was to Zeus Connect, and he did a grant. I think
he was in Vitalia, if we're talking about the same guy.
No, we have two guys who are like
Is it Dimitri?
No, the guy who connected us actually.
Oh, okay.
Aleksandar.
Yeah. Oh my God.
It's like everyone's Aleksandar.
Yeah, everyone is Alex.
So I was brainstorming on his proposal like a few months ago, and actually we were chatting about like, okay, but like if you build like a tool specifically for zoo thing, like how can it like have bigger impact or scale? And then actually it can be seen as some sort of like micro experiments, or actually build like these different mechanisms or tools that can actually prove the point, and then can actually be used in like more regular societies even. Which is also an interesting, like you kind of prove the point, and then basically it goes back to like the normal world, so to say. Yeah, so that's an interesting angle.
It's kind
like
of lab.
you basically prove, it's like you're basically doing an experiment, prove something. But like the whole governance thing is like super interesting and important as an experimental thing. I think that like people often like don't appreciate how regulation impacts everything, and especially in terms of like these like scientific things, and having an open canvas for experimentation is great.
Yeah.
It's also like interesting from my perspective is like the idea that you can actually have a leverage over a state. Like I was always really interested in like this idea of like you have the community, and the community has the power, but actually if you have like a large enough community which is organic, and you have enough capital, you can actually negotiate with a state, because you have an actual leverage. So basically you have like 100,000 people and like, let's say $5 billion, you can negotiate with a country. And it's like community negotiating in a country, which is like also very interesting from like a political science perspective.
Yeah, I think I also agree this is very cool. And I think like the idea in general is not necessarily as new as we now have the technology and means and all the tools.
And culture.
Exactly. And the culture is there, and the culture has, I think only in the last 15 years that I've been closely following this movement has grown so much in a sense of that was something that there would be like 20 of us meeting in apartments and discussing and having all of these conversations to something that's becoming kind of a globally discussed topic with millions of people generally being interested in that. So just to kind of add a little bit of, I didn't have a Zoo Connect or Zoo Village experience yet, but I've been participating in a lot of these calls on Zoo Village, Georgia. And what I really liked is that I thought I was joining pretty early, but it's like you have this almost emerging order where people are just discussing the topics and the themes and what kind of discussions could there be. And you almost feel like it's rare that after a meeting you feel energized and you're sort of excited for what's to come. And this sort of gives me gives me that same feeling and vibe. And I think that's very exciting to see in kind of these early new movements where you can see that there's the potential is still there. It's still not diluted by becoming too cool, and people are just sort of inspired to take on new challenges, new things, discuss. And even during these calls, I was kind of very interested in how much I can just learn from listening to that. But back to what you were saying, I think like the tools and the technology that we now have allows for kind of people who are aligned in their visions, in their ideas, to communicate way more effectively, to a completely another scale than it was possible, even just in like when we were born, maybe like 20 or 30 years ago. And it allows for both communication, but also more important for coordination. And this is what we've been seeing specifically in Roatan when it comes to Prospera, but also many of the new emerging projects, and be it kind of early attempts at the governance, early attempts at network states, or be it organizing projects, collaborations, and all of this. And I think what we've been seeing is probably going to be a trend. I mean, I'm definitely positive that that's going to be a trend that's going to be continuing. We're probably going to see some pushback as well. I mean, there's definitely like kind of researching for this, you can definitely see that there's pushback, and there's like, for instance, hit pieces on clinical trials on Roatan just because they're like, you cannot do gene therapy. It's complete. There's obviously there's reasons that the hit pieces are giving, but I think it's also something that's very exciting to see, because it allows and it takes this important piece of important part of possibilities and kind of makes it real. And when others see that that's possible, we're going to probably be seeing more and more of these emerging projects coming up.
Yeah, it's a lot about innovation, right?
Absolutely.
When the state also helps the innovation, or it becomes like more permissive, more open to it, that's the environment where you have new creations and network state, Zuzalu, pop-up city. It's about that. It's creating this environment.
Right, and what I'd add, at least from my perspective, is that state doesn't usually doesn't know very well where funds are needed, or doesn't know how to distribute them, or has these huge, large innovation funds, but gives the money away to regular startups just to either fill in their KPIs or kind of spray shooting and hoping that there's going to be a unicorn happening somewhere in Serbia. I think this is what we've been seeing as well. And in this way, we see a lot of people who are actually ready to invest their own time, capital. Obviously, the states or the state can try and stop that from happening, but I think it's much harder once you invest your own means, your own energy. Pretty much what I've been seeing with Zoo Village, at least, it's completely self-organized. It's supported by people who believe in it, but it doesn't depend on pretty much anyone.
People actually invest their own time and money, which like makes it like very true to an extent, right?
Time and money?
Yeah. It's like voluntary.
Yeah, absolutely.
So people choose to do X, which is great, I think. But it's like from a historical perspective, like even if you go back to time, like there were times where like there were like these little small free towns. So like maybe in the future, and like maybe we'll have like, it was like when I first like heard the concept, like okay, like the idea is like have an hyperstate, you basically create a new country. Like, oh, this sounds nice. No, this sounds nuts. But if you think about it from like a historical perspective, it doesn't necessarily need to be that nuts. As in like 500 years ago, there were like many of these free cities, Like,
I mean, not
things are changing, right?
not that long ago, the idea of a nation state was uncommon and weird, and maybe the idea of transitioning from a nation state to something else would still, like, probably not people in this room, but like if you went out and
Yeah, right. But when I was like discussing with a friend from London, I was like, okay, but like if we do then like what do we do with military? But like you can still have some sort of arrangement where like a certain military protects you. Like you can outsource that, right? Like you can still have like a microstate and basically don't think about defense, for example, because you're partnering with like a bigger state or something.
yeah, I mean, obviously protection is probably one of the biggest issues where even like libertarians among themselves are not quite certain what that would be. To that, I would add that more than 50% of those protection providers at the moment are private. They're not necessarily government-funded organizations. They're like private security companies. So obviously, I'm not suggesting that that's going to be something that we're going to be seeing like in the very, very immediate near future. But I do not think it's as impossible as it might sound if said out loud.
Yeah, actually, I have a question for both. Like, oh, this sounds great and sexy and exciting, but like, why is on-chain element important piece of this whole thing?
Why is the on-chain?
Yes, yes. Okay, you have a concept, an idea of a microstate. If you do that and add blockchain to it, like putting everything on chain, what's the value of it, in your opinion, especially for you?
Yeah,
Good question.
I think two main points. One is the ownership, really, of and provable ownership of it. So there is like a record, undeniable record. So I think first thing, ownership. The second thing, it's the automation of the processes. So like you have the code there saying that if X happens, Y will be executed. And nobody can not say it will not be executed. So it's not depending on a human, it's depending on a code. And the blockchain paradigm permits that. So it's not the same thing if it's on a server, right? Because someone can change the code base. So in the blockchain, that permits this automation of the regulation of the law. So I think these two components make it pretty special for the government or the nation to adopt this and build more primitives around this, you know?
Have like inbuilt transparency, which contributes to trust, I guess.
Yes, yes.
But they're like very experimental to like have something like built from scratch in that way. So like certain things are just impossible, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you said is absolutely right. I mean, immutability and just transparency. So, and we can relate it to many different things. So we can relate it to, for instance, how in certain parts of the world, unfortunately, the claims over your property are currently in many places disputed, and sometimes they depend on the local bookkeeping, which is not that great. Most parts of Serbia, I think, had a problem with that until recently, and at least in historic times, and you can imagine that many parts of the world still do. I think that's an amazing application of blockchain in this specifically when it comes to governance. We were talking initially, the topic was supposed to be clinical trials. I think it has a really important potential application there as well, especially if we're talking about decentralized medical studies, right? If you have people all over the world testing a certain drug or a certain medical device, the idea that you would have that data immediately, immutably on the blockchain for anyone running the clinical trial to see, I think can be an extremely, extremely important thing. And I think we're probably, obviously, in the first, I guess, after the first serious, I guess, mainstream crypto boom in 2017, there were so many projects promising inclusion of blockchain in all of these things, including governance. I think that probably in the next couple of years, we're actually going to see like real applications of that to a much larger extent than we have been seeing now. We've been seeing amazing projects, some very successful, but I think that the adoption era, at least when it comes to like governance and government, is only going to grow. I don't know.
Yeah. I have one thing to add on top of that. That is, there are governments out there adopting blockchain. So, for example, Brazil, it's in a pilot phase using Hyperledger Bezo, that is like an EVM node inside the central bank. So that's already happening. Banks transferring, doing like interbank transfer on an EVM blockchain. That's already happening. The thing is how this network is set up, because they are using Hyperledger Bezo, but it's like a permissioned network. So it's not what we want to see, right? So there is kind of like, you see that some kind of adoption and governments pushing the innovation already. There is a pretty cool link about CBDC. If you search CBDC tracker, so there you see like the initiatives around the world. And I think the next step as we move forward and governments feel more comfortable with the technology is like, okay, now it's not a permissioned network.
Yeah.
Now we really use like something decentralized and build on top of it, you know.
Absolutely. CBDC tracker, like if you haven't checked it out, I think it's amazing. I think it's a project by Human Rights Foundation. And they've been doing grants for pretty much anyone trying to fight the CBDCs or kind of raise awareness about them. It's a very cool project. And like if that's something that any of you are interested in, it gives, just looking at the projects, I think you can get a lot of ideas on what different countries and different organizations could do. There's definitely a lot of space still there, I think, unfulfilled.
Yes, yes.
Let's engage with the audience. Does anyone wants to contribute? Because this is like an unconference moment of the conference in the spirit of Zuzalo and decentralization. So anyone wants to say something or ask something, share an experience?
I can.
We can do it too, yeah. You do want to ask them?
Ask them? No, I don't.
I
I don't like to scare you. You know, it's like if I'm in the audience and someone asks me, I'm always like.
Right. Okay, that makes sense.
But I don't know. It would be interesting. I'm glad to hear that Zuzu, for instance, or Zoo Connect is going to be happening in Brazil. I'd like to see more of that in the Balkans. I mean, obviously, like Zoo Village, I guess it was called, or.
The original thing was in Montenegro, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah, true.
And that was like an incredible. I mean, I think us from here, we're kind of watching that happening. We're like, is this real? Like Vitalik and everyone is hanging out in Montenegro for 2 months, and I think that was incredible. But I think there's still a lot of potential for people who are maybe not very aware of the concept and what's happening there, but we do have incredible talent in the Balkans, pretty much anywhere across the region, I guess, in many of the topics that are discussed typically at these sorts of conferences, be it extras.
So it's also a great way for us to like invite people to come to us, which is an opportunity.
Absolutely.
To come from like a region that was like forgotten or like disconnected for a while.
Absolutely. So I mean, it would already do a great thing because there's so much talent here. But it's still, even though obviously Serbia is not connected to the world, but it's not as connected as it could be. And I think there's a lot of talent and knowledge kind of going unnoticed or under the radar, which I think could benefit many of these, obviously from cross-pollination.
Yeah, maybe one more interesting comment on basically all of these things, like it's a question of identity to an extent, because like a lot of these people who participate in all of these things actually consider themselves like the internet first. So like it's an identity thing, kind of like do you have any thoughts on that?
Sorry, can you repeat?
It's like as an identity thing. So basically when people join, like they're this they have like a same set of values, although they come from like different parts of the world and countries and cultures. So there's something unique about the internet culture, which is like basically a cultural aspect on the whole movement. So maybe if you have any thoughts on that, because quite often, me personally, I think a lot about these things. So for example, you meet someone like from like a different culture, but like you have so much similarities because like a lot of values are basically from the internet, like. In the lack of a better explanation.
Yeah, and when I arrived, they gave me like the pass and like a playbook or like a handbook, guidebook, whatever. And that's kind of like how you set up the beginning or like set the tone and then you have this mixture of culture, of like people all over the world, but there is this clarity, or like this goal of experimentation, of learning, and on innovation. I think that's the biggest point. Like just sharing knowledge and experimenting. I think that's the most exciting culture.
Yeah, I think when it comes to internet first, I think like for us specifically, like if you were born between maybe 85 and 95, it's a very interesting position
Yeah,
to be in.
we know both worlds.
Hmm?
know
Yeah,
both worlds.
we are the last or the first generation to have like lived in in both worlds. So we were using like a ringer phone when we were kids. Sorry, it was 90s Serbia. So that's what we had. But then like 10 years later, you get a dial-up internet and then wireless and then ADSL and then like satellite, whatever. So you kind of, we are the first and last ones to obviously like know the analog and
Yeah,
the
but
digital
we
world.
have the excitement that new generations don't have because we know both worlds, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so for us, it's still like magic.
Wow,
Like,
yeah.
Now imagine the next steps, like with DeSci, for example,
Sure.
or well, I bought like a Apple Vision Pro to understand, and I was just shocked.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, I can say to my son or daughter like, hey, I live in a time where we use it like a iPhone, you know, like. So it's fun.
And I think it's generally like, just to circle back on the internet culture thing, I think it's super important and kind of exciting because like maybe for us I was born in the 90s. And it would be like if I go to Brazil, I know someone's going to know about Power Rangers and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Yeah.
And that would be like a common thread between our cultures, even though we might not have many. But today kids have all sorts of things. They have like, if you say LOL, it doesn't matter they don't speak your language. Everyone knows what it is. And I think these things are going to be coming like even more to the forefront. So the internet culture and whatever it did is just going to grow. And that's pretty exciting. So for whoever is like an internet native will immediately have more friends or people to connect over things all around the globe. It's super exciting.
Another round of
No
audience
que-
engagement.
We're staying here until someone asks a question.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So there are a few very smart libertarians sitting in the very heart of the room. So I'm looking at you. Oh yeah, sure. Do you have any thoughts on like the concept of network states and building new cities from scratch and stuff like that? Yeah, maybe this is, yeah. Maybe this is a question for you. It was like intended for the
Yeah,
panel.
so I mean, I think like even so if you look at the, for instance, the polycentric law system, right? You can have first numerous rules on the same territory, but then also I think that most of the cases that we have so far with ZEDES and with any of these territories is that rules do exist, specifically with ZEDES in Honduras. I mean, they're obviously obliged to follow a set of rules set by the Honduran government. And I think in these early stages, where most of the network states and most of the, let's say, sort of these microstates are based on territories of existing states, we're going to be seeing this, let's call them public-private partnerships, where obviously the governments of those countries are not very eager to share their sovereignty over the country for anyone. So there's definitely sets of rules. I think in theory what would work perfectly is that you have many emerging network states with many different sets of rules where those could be compared to each other, where we could see what would be the benefits of each and how each of those work. I think it's still relatively new. So seeing how, let's say that you're starting whatever medical company in one of the ZEDES, and then you can pick whatever OECD member law you want to do, is obviously going to be confusing. But I think in the end, it's going to allow for new innovation in a way that you're going to be seeing companies coming after that and seeing which models have been picked. So have they picked like an Italian system for this, or have they picked like a German way of regulating one specific small thing, or have they decided to go with their own sets of rules? So I think that's, for me at least, when reading about this, that's the most exciting part. It's the companies or the businesses that have decided on their own sets of rules, have gotten a permission from the local authorities, and are trying to build on that, because that allows us like a very
It's also like for the arbitrage like aspect, like basically if you're like in a new separate environment, like that's also like something that on-chain and smart contracts that could actually help with, right? Like even if you're like in some sort of a void, you can still have like code where both sides kind of agree that these are the terms. It's like hardcore libertarian
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
deep
But
stuff, but yeah, it could work. But the question actually for both of you, like, does like all of this require like prior big state? Like this is like in relation to like certain states,
does it require prior?
some sort of relationships with existing big state powers. Say, for example, someone who can like enforce the rule, or something like that. So it's like basically just an improvement of the existing system, kind of.
It sort of is. I mean, it's
Yeah.
obviously going to depend on like the type of state that you operate under.
In the end, you need the guns.
Yeah,
That's the point.
In the end, I mean, unless you have monopoly on force, and most of these places do not, they're still subject to probably potential whims of whoever is in power next. So I think that's obviously going to be a big hurdle. So like, I mean, in Honduras, that sort of already happened, is that you had a change of government, and the new government came and was like, oh, this was a bad deal. So how can we?
Yeah, what happens then?
Well, obviously that process took a couple of months, probably longer. There were a lot of the discussions and negotiations with Prospera, from what I gathered, and the zones stayed in the end. The people living around, and the people who are working in Morasan and in Prospera were extremely happy with this. So I think in the end they backed off. But I don't think that fear, unfortunately, I don't think that's like sorted forever. I think there's still going to be potential issues down the line. And this is obviously going to be the case for other network states as well. Whoever tries to do something similar wherever, they're going to be facing pushback. And this is something that I think there's not a lot of deep thought put into, but I think we're probably going to be seeing someone trying to figure out what the solution for that is as well, because at the moment that is, we do not have a lot of uninhabited territories to explore, so we're still dependent, unfortunately.
Yeah, but there's a lot of actually physical, which is an interesting point. Like, yeah, like it is like cost driven and but like if you look at it from like a business perspective, like starting a state is like the ultimate like enterprise to an extent. So that's also an interesting aspect. Like you actually build like the whole economy from scratch, kind of like in the more ambitious form of it, right? Third round of questions, the last round of questions for the audience.
I think dinner is set.
Yeah. If not, like, do you have any closing remarks?
Well, perhaps
What should people do?
just inspiring others to join the next Tuvalu event if they can. I think that's always like a good advice.
Now, for me, just thanks for inviting me. I think this was super exciting listening to all the other talks. I've definitely learned some and some more. And for the last couple of days, whoever was at the Ethereum Belgrade, there was also a lot of things, a lot of great side events. So looking forward to the next one. Thanks for organizing this.
Yeah. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.